Ethan Ward had lived most of his life on the open plains of Montana, where the wind brushed against the tall grass like an old friend, and the sun rose over the hills in soft gold. He was known as a quiet rancher, a man who spoke little but worked hard every single day. His family ranch stretched across acres of land, full of cattle, horses, and the smell of pine drifting from the distant woods. People in the small nearby town respected him, but he kept to himself. After losing his parents early and ending a long relationship years ago, he had quietly accepted that fatherhood was not part of his story. Ethan woke every morning before dawn, fed the horses, checked the fences, and rode across the land to make sure everything was safe. He lived by routine, not because he loved loneliness, but because it was all he had left. He sometimes wondered what it might have been like to have a child running across the yard or a family waiting for him at the porch. But those thoughts faded as quickly as they came. Life had taught him that some dreams were not meant to be. One chilly evening in late autumn, Ethan was riding home from the north pasture. The sky was slowly turning orange and purple, a sign that darkness was close. His horse, Dusty, walked calmly along the narrow dirt trail that looped around the ridge. Ethan had taken this trail 1,000 times, and nothing ever changed here. But that evening, something strange happened. A soft metallic sound echoed across the empty land, like a chain brushing against rock. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind stirring loose wire somewhere. But then it came again, faint, irregular, almost like someone was struggling. Dusty's ears twitched. Ethan tightened his grip on the reins and listened. Another small clink. It was too sharp to be the wind, too light to be an animal. His stomach tightened with concern. Out here at this hour, no one should be wandering alone. He nudged Dusty forward, guiding him toward a thin trail that led down a small slope. The sound grew clearer as he approached a soft rattle, then silence, then another small rattle. Ethan's heartbeat picked up. He followed the noise until he reached an old broken fence. Long abandoned and half covered in weeds, there, in the fading light, he saw something that made his breath stop, a small girl thin, shivering. Barefoot was sitting on the ground with her back against the wooden post. A heavy rusted chain was fastened around her ankle, connected to the post behind her. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt. Her hair was messy, tangled, and her face had streaks of dried tears. She looked no older than 9. When she heard Ethan's steps, she flinched violently and tried to pull away. But the chain stopped her. For a second, Ethan couldn't move. Shock held him still. He had seen lost animals, injured hikers, even runaway teens before. But never a child chained alone in the cold evening. He slowly dismounted Dusty, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "I'm not here to scare you." The girl pressed herself against the post, trying to make herself small. Her eyes were wide and filled with fear. She didn't say a word. Ethan took one careful step closer, then paused. "My name is Ethan. I live nearby. You're safe now, I promise. Can I come closer?" No answer. Just trembling. Ethan noticed her hands. They were scraped and bruised, like she had tried many times to free herself. His chest tightened painfully. "It's okay," he whispered again. "I won't hurt you." He knelt on the ground, keeping a little distance so she didn't feel trapped. Up close, he could see how cold she was. Her lips were pale, and her fingers were stiff. His voice stayed soft. "I need to help you out of this chain. Is that all right?" Slowly, very slowly. The girl gave the smallest nod. Ethan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tool he used for opening old locks and tightening wire fences. As he approached the chain, the girl squeezed her eyes shut, like she expected something bad to happen. Ethan worked carefully, making sure the lock clicked loudly enough so she knew he wasn't pulling on her. After a few minutes of patient effort, the rusted lock snapped open. Ethan pulled the chain away from her ankle and tossed it aside gently. "You're free," he murmured. The girl didn't run. She didn't even move. She just stared at him with big, frightened eyes. "Can I carry you?" he asked softly. "It's getting cold and we're far from town." I'll take you to my ranch. You'll be warm there. You'll be safe." Again, there was no answer, but she didn't back away when he reached for her. Carefully, Ethan wrapped his coat around her small body and picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. Her arms hung loosely at first, but halfway to Dusty. She gripped Ethan's shirt weakly. The small touch hit him harder than he expected. He mounted, Dusty with the girl in his arms, holding her close so the wind wouldn't reach her. As they rode back, Ethan kept speaking softly, though she didn't respond. "You're all right now," he said. "No one's going to leave you out here again." The world around them grew darker, and the cold wind brushed against Ethan's face, but he shielded the girl with his body. Dusty hurried as if he understood the urgency. By the time they reached the ranch, lights glowed softly from the windows, casting warm beams on the ground. Ethan carried her inside and placed her on the couch near the fireplace. He quickly lit more wood, raising the heat until the room felt safe and warm. The girl sat curled up in the coat, her eyes following his movements. He brought her warm water, a soft blanket, and a pair of socks. She didn't speak, but she accepted everything quietly. Whenever Ethan moved too fast, she flinched slightly, and that told him more than any words could. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push her. He simply said, "You can stay here as long as you need." As the fire crackled, the girl slowly relaxed. Her eyes drooped, heavy with exhaustion. When Ethan turned away for a moment to get food, he heard the softest sound, barely a whisper, "Don't leave." Ethan froze. He turned back to her gently. "I'm right here," he said. "I won't go anywhere." Her eyes closed, trust fragile, but present. Ethan stayed awake long into the night, sitting in the armchair near her so she wouldn't feel alone. Outside, the cold wind pushed against the house, but inside, everything was quiet. As he watched her sleep, something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. The ranch had always been silent, filled only with the sounds of cattle and wind. But now, there was a small presence in the house, a fragile life that needed protection. Ethan thought he had missed the chance to ever be a father. He had told himself that dream was behind him. But as he watched, the little girl curled under the blanket. Safe for the first time in who knows how long? Something warm and heavy settled in his chest. Maybe destiny had different plans for him. Maybe this child had been brought into his life for a reason. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what horrors she had faced before he found her. All he knew was simple. She wasn't alone anymore. And he wasn't either. Outside, the night grew deeper, but inside Ethan's ranch, a quiet beginning took shape, one that neither of them understood yet, but both of them needed more than they knew. The morning sun slowly filled Ethan Ward's ranch with pale yellow light, touching every wooden wall, every quiet corner, and finally reaching the couch where the small rescued girl was sleeping. Ethan had not slept much. He had stayed in the armchair all night, watching over her, making sure she didn't wake up alone, scared or confused. When her eyes finally opened, the first thing she saw was the warm glow of the fire. The second thing she saw was Ethan sitting nearby, half tired but fully alert. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were still fearful, like she was trying to remember where she was and whether she was safe. "Good morning," Ethan said in a gentle voice. "You're at my ranch. You're safe." The girl blinked slowly, her shoulders relaxing when she saw he wasn't angry or loud. She looked around the room, the wooden shelves, the large window showing open fields, the warm fire. This place didn't look dangerous. It felt soft, quiet, and peaceful. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked softly. She didn't answer with words, but she gave a tiny nod. Ethan smiled gently and stood up. "All right, I'll make something simple. You can just rest." She watched him carefully as he moved to the kitchen. Every sound, the clink of a plate, the soft thud of bread on a cutting board, made her flinch a little, like she expected something bad to happen. But Ethan kept his movements slow and calm. He placed food on the table, warm eggs, bread, and a cup of milk. Nothing fancy, but enough. "You can eat whenever you're ready," he said. "No rush." The girl hesitated, then slowly walked to the table. She sat quietly and ate in small bites. Ethan didn't sit too close. He stayed across the room, cleaning some gear, letting her have space, and for the first time since he found her, he saw something new. She looked calmer, fragile, yes. Scared, yes. But calmer. Hours passed. The girl wandered around the ranch house, always keeping Ethan in sight. She didn't go far, like she was afraid he might disappear. Whenever he stepped outside to feed the horses, she followed him to the door and peeked out to make sure he was still there. Ethan noticed it. He pretended not to, giving her the freedom to move at her pace. Around noon, he walked out to the barn to check on Dusty and the cattle. He sensed small footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw her standing by the barn entrance, watching him curiously. "You can come in if you want," he said softly. She hesitated, then slowly stepped inside. Ethan showed her the horses from a distance. Dusty, his loyal horse, leaned forward, sniffing gently at the girl. She stiffened at first, but when the horse nudged her hand softly, she let out the smallest breath, almost a tiny laugh. Ethan saw it. A spark of something warm. "Something alive. That's Dusty," he said. "He's friendly." The girl touched Dusty's nose gently. Her fingers trembled, but for a moment she didn't look scared. She looked like a child should look, curious and innocent. Later in the afternoon, Ethan gave her a set of clean clothes, simple warm stuff he had bought years ago for visiting family. They were a little big, but she didn't mind. She stared at the clothes, then at Ethan. "Can I change here?" She whispered softly. Ethan understood instantly. "You can use the room down the hall. It's yours for now." She nodded and disappeared into the room. When she returned, the clothes hung loosely on her small frame, but she looked more comfortable. The dirt on her skin was washed away, her hair slightly brushed, and her eyes clearer. She looked like a normal little girl now, not like someone who had been left alone in fear. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest that he wasn't used to, a mix of protectiveness and sadness. As the day went on, he tried to learn more about her, but he didn't push. Eventually, she spoke in small pieces. "My name is Leela," she whispered while sitting on the porch watching the empty fields. "Leela," Ethan repeated kindly. "That's a nice name." She nodded, hugging her knees. After a long silence, she spoke again. "Will they come back?" Ethan's body stiffened. "Who?" he asked carefully. But Lila only shook her head and looked away. Fear grew in her eyes again, the kind of fear that came from memories she wasn't ready to share. Ethan didn't ask more. He placed a hand on the porch railing and said calmly, "No one is going to take you from here. I won't let anything happen to you." His voice was firm, not loud, not threatening, but full of certainty. Leela seemed to study his face, searching for any sign of doubt. She didn't find any. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she rested her chin on her knees again as evening fell. Clouds gathered, and the wind grew colder. A storm was coming. Ethan hurried to close the barn doors and secure the animals. Lila stayed at the window, watching the sky grow darker. Thunder rolled across the plains, and she froze. The first crack of lightning made her drop to the floor, covering her ears with both hands, shaking violently. Ethan rushed back inside. Leela. She was curled up tightly under the table, trembling like the world was ending. "It's okay," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "It's just thunder. You're safe." But she was too scared to move. Ethan didn't drag her out or raise his voice. He simply slid under the table with her and wrapped his coat around her. He sat beside her quietly, letting her feel his presence. Minutes passed. Slowly, her shaking lessened. She peeked at him, tears on her cheeks. "Storms are loud," Ethan said gently. "But they can't hurt you in here. I promise." Leela's voice broke into a whisper. "They hurt me when the storms came." Ethan felt something inside him ache. He wanted to ask what that meant, but he knew now was not the time. Instead, he placed a hand near her, not touching her, but letting her see he wasn't leaving. "I'm not them," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore." The storm rumbled for another hour. They stayed together under the table until the thunder faded. When Lila finally crawled out, she leaned slightly against Ethan's arm. The first time she reached out without fear, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply let her lean. Later, Ethan made warm soup for dinner. Lila ate quietly, occasionally glancing up at him like she was making sure he was still real. After dinner, Ethan sat by the fire, and Lila came over with her blanket. She sat on the floor near his chair, not too close, but not far either. "Can I sleep here?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Of course." She curled up near the fire. For the first time, she didn't ask him to stay in the chair beside her. Instead, she said something that surprised him. "You don't have to stay awake," she whispered. I won't be scared." Ethan looked at her carefully. Her eyes were tired, but peaceful. Not fully healed, but safe enough to rest. "I'll be right here," he said. She nodded, trusting him. When she fell asleep, Ethan watched her for a long time. Her face was calm, no fear tightening her features. She looked like a child who had finally reached a safe place after running for too long. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his thoughts heavy. Lila had been through something terrible, something no child should ever face. And whoever had left her chained on that trail, they were still out there. He felt something new growing inside him. Not just protectiveness, something deeper, something stronger. Responsibility, connection, almost like family. He never imagined he would feel this for anyone again, especially a child. But here she was, fragile, quiet, frightened, yet trusting him enough to sleep peacefully for the first time in who knows how long. Ethan whispered softly, as if speaking to the night itself, "I'll protect you, Lila, as long as you need me." The wind outside calmed. The ranch settled into silence. And in that quiet moment, Ethan realized something that made his heart tighten. He was no longer just a lonely rancher. He was becoming something else, something he once believed he could never be. Someone's guardian, someone's safe place, someone who mattered, and the girl sleeping. Beside the fire, the girl he had found by pure chance was slowly becoming the center of his world. Tomorrow, he would have to call the sheriff, file a report, and try to understand who had hurt her and why. He knew there would be hard days ahead. But for now, tonight, there was peace. The beginning of trust, the beginning of healing, the beginning of a bond neither of them had planned. But both needed more than they could ever explain. Days passed quietly on Ethan Ward's ranch. Each morning brought a little more warmth into Lila's eyes, a little more trust in her steps, and a little more life to a place that once held only silence. Ethan tried to keep things slow and steady. He cooked simple meals, taught her how to brush Dusty, and gave her space whenever she needed it. But even as the ranch grew peaceful, Ethan knew something important couldn't be avoided forever. He had to contact the sheriff. It wasn't only about justice. It was about safety. Lila deserved protection not just from the weather or the dark, but from the people who had left her chained alone in the cold. Ethan knew she couldn't stay hidden forever, no matter how much he wanted to keep her close and safe. One morning, after Lila finished eating her breakfast quietly, Ethan knelt beside her. "I need to take you into town today," he said softly, "to talk to the sheriff. He can help you. You won't be alone, and I won't leave your side." The moment he mentioned the sheriff, Lila's hands began to shake. Her spoon clattered quietly against the bowl. She shook her head hard, panic rising in her eyes. "No, no police," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan sighed gently and placed a calming hand on the table, not touching her, but close. "The sheriff is a good man," he explained. "He won't hurt you. He'll help us make sure no one can take you again." Lila hugged herself tightly, fear taking over again. What if they find me? Ethan didn't answer right away. He sat down slowly so she wouldn't feel small or pressured. "If anyone tries to come for you," he said with steady confidence, "they'll have to get through me first." Lila blinked at him. Something strong and certain settled on her face. She didn't look fully convinced. but she trusted him enough to try. They rode to town on Dusty, with Lila sitting in front of Ethan so she felt safe. Her tiny hands gripped the saddle horn while Ethan kept his arms steady on both sides of her. The ride was quiet, the cold wind brushing their faces. But Lila didn't tremble as much as before. When the sheriff's office came into view, Lila leaned back slightly, pressing closer to Ethan. He whispered, "I'm right here," and she nodded faintly. Sheriff Daniels. A tall, older man with kind eyes walked out to greet them. He had known Ethan for years, respected him, and trusted his words. "You all right, Ethan?" he asked. Ethan nodded and glanced at Lila. "Sheriff, this is Lila. I found her chained near the old ridge." Daniels's expression shifted instantly, shock, concern, and quiet anger on her behalf. "Come inside," he said gently. "Both of you." Inside the office, the sheriff kept his voice steady and warm. He offered Lila water and didn't ask too many questions. He spoke gently, with pauses long enough for her to breathe. Slowly, she told him small pieces of her story, how she had been taken by a couple who traveled around, how she'd been forced to work, how she was left alone when they got angry. Sheriff Daniels took notes, his face tight but calm. He didn't push her for more. When she began to tremble, Ethan placed his jacket around her shoulders. She immediately relaxed. After an hour, Daniels closed his notebook. "Ethan," he said, "I'll put out alerts. We'll find the people who did this. But until then, she stays with you. You're the safest person she has." Lila clung to Ethan's sleeve, relief washing over her small face. The sheriff walked them to the door. "And Ethan," he added quietly, "if you decide to apply for guardianship, I don't think anyone would question it." Words stayed in Ethan's mind long after they left. Town guardianship, fatherhood, a responsibility deeper than the land he worked and the horses he cared for. He hadn't planned on any of this. But as he looked at Lila resting safely in his arms, leaning against him as they rode back to the ranch, he knew one thing for certain. He wanted to be the one who protected her. Days turned into weeks. The ranch became a place of healing. Lila learned to help with small chores, though Ethan never forced her. She brushed Dusty every morning, laughing quietly when the horse huffed warm air into her face. She followed Ethan around the ranch, watching how he fixed fences, fed the cattle, repaired tools. Sometimes she spoke in short sentences. Sometimes she stayed silent, lost in her thoughts. But she was no longer afraid of sleeping alone. And she didn't hide under tables during storms anymore. One sunny afternoon, Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the fields sway in the wind. When he sat beside her, she looked at him with clear eyes. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you help me?" Ethan looked out at the horizon. "Because no child should be alone out there," he replied. "And because you needed someone." Lila thought for a moment. Then she said in a tiny voice, "Do you want me here?" Ethan turned to her fully. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I want you here, Lila." The simple truth washed over her like sunlight. After that day, something deeper changed. Lila began to smile more. She spoke a little more. She walked with more confidence. She even helped Ethan cook, though her version of helping mostly involved dropping vegetables on the floor and laughing softly at herself. But peace doesn't last forever. One evening, as Ethan was feeding the horses, he heard fast footsteps on gravel. Sheriff Daniels was riding up the path on his motorcycle, worry written on his face. "Ethan," he said quickly, "we found tracks near the ridge. Fresh ones. I think the people who hurt Lila are back in the area." The words cut through the air like a blade. Lila, standing on the porch with a broom, dropped it in shock. Her face went pale, and her eyes filled with panic. Ethan stepped forward immediately. "Where?" 4 miles east," Daniels replied. "We're tracking them now, but they're dangerous. Keep Lila inside. Lock the doors." Ethan thanked him, then hurried Lila inside. She was shaking just like she had during the storm. "They're here," she whispered. "They'll take me again." Ethan knelt in front of her and placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, not gripping, just grounding. "Listen to me," he said with unwavering calm. You are not going anywhere. Not while I'm here. You're safe. Leela looked at him through tears. But what if you get hurt? Ethan shook his head. Nothing will happen to me, and nothing will happen to you. The next few hours were tense. The ranch was quiet. Ethan kept a watchful eye on every corner, every sound, every shadow. Lila stayed close to him, refusing to leave his side. Finally, near midnight, the sheriff returned with 2 deputies. "It's over," Daniels announced. "We caught them. Both of them. They were trying to move through the backwoods. They're in custody now." Lila released a trembling breath and collapsed against Ethan, crying softly, not from fear now, but relief. Ethan wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders, letting her feel safe. The next morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, paperwork spread before him. Sheriff Daniels had brought more forms. Adoption forms, guardianship forms, future forms, and choices. Lila stood quietly by the door, watching him. Finally, Ethan looked up and smiled. "Lila," said softly, "I want to ask you something. You don't have to answer right away." She stepped closer, her small feet silent on the floor. Ethan took a deep breath. "Would you like to stay here? With me? Not just for now, but forever. If you want." "I'd like to be your family." Lila froze. Her eyes filled with tears, not scared tears, but tears filled with more emotion than she had words for. "Forever?" She whispered. "Yes," Ethan said. "If that's what you want." Lila rushed forward and hugged him tightly. It was the first time she had ever hugged him without hesitation. Ethan closed his arms gently around her, careful not to overwhelm her. "I want this. I want to stay," she whispered against his chest. And just like that, something long lost inside Ethan finally healed in the weeks that followed. Hearings were held, papers were signed, and the judge approved everything. Leela officially became part of Ethan's life. Not by accident, but because she chose him and he chose her. The day they returned home from the courthouse, Leela ran into the yard, twirling in the wind, laughing openly for the first time since Ethan met her. "Dad." She called out suddenly, testing the word. Ethan turned slowly. The word washed through him like the warm sun. She repeated it, louder this time, running into his arms. "Dad?" Ethan lifted her slightly, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled in years. His eyes stung, but he held back the tears, choosing instead to focus on the joy standing before him. The ranch, once lonely and quiet, now echoed with laughter and hope. The world had surprised Ethan in the most unexpected way. A man who thought he'd never be a father had found his daughter not by blood, but by destiny. And Lila had found something just as precious. Protector, a family. A forever place where fear no longer followed her. Their lives were changed forever, that day not by chance, but by courage, kindness, and the simple truth that sometimes the family you're meant to have finds you when you least expect it.